One of the hardest things to do is admit your mistakes, be they your personal mistakes, be they mistakes that your country have made, be they mistakes that maybe someone you care about have made. It's hard to admit things that have been done wrong, and again, whether it's in your personal life, politics, anything like that, it's hard because you're showing yourself to be vulnerable. You're showing yourself to be weak, and I think that personal trouble with admitting flaws extends to our governance. It extends to our history. And usually, if you made a mistake, if someone tells you that you made a mistake, let's just start at the personal level, what's often is the reaction, and I mean, we've all been there, is a virulent defense. Doesn't have to be logical, doesn't have to be coherent. But no matter what, you don't want to admit that you made that mistake. And in that happening, we see the same thing at a government level, where you see a mistake and you criticize, even if you're criticizing your own country that you may love. And you're making that criticism out of wanting to help your country become better. But the response is often vitriol. It's often being told that you hate your country, that you are against your country, because you are admitting flaws. And I think that's something that can only be a hindrance. Now, we have to have a knowledge that, of context, and we can't put everything in the context of 2007, 2018. These years just keep going by and they're getting crazier and crazier. But we still have to be cognizant of it. Because why do we want to know our history? Is because we want to be able to learn from it to become better. But what if that history has been written in a way that's meant to keep a status quo, so to speak? What if that's meant to protect the elite class and is meant to cover the information of the history of the working people or groups that have been persecuted through history? Then what about that? All right. Why, when we're in school, we may hear a little bit on the surface of the bad things we did, but we never really dig deep. But when there are good things or supposedly good things done, we get all the details, all the pride of that. And the bad things are seen as, oh, they were unavoidable. I have to think back to when I grew up in suburbia. And a good school, middle class upbringing. But when you grew up, you learned about the history of your area. And I'm not saying this is exclusive to the U.S., because I'm sure all countries do this. But when I think of, and now I'm reading a lot of books and seeing a lot of different things of, why didn't I know that Henry Kissinger was a fucking piece of shit motherfucking war criminal who should be dead already? I don't want to say I wish he'd be dead. Maybe, okay, let me adjust that a little bit. He should be in the Hague, should be a war crime tribunal. Why didn't that get taught in school? Because when you look at the records, and this is not only academics records, but from the Pentagon, the things they did in Cambodia and Laos and Vietnam are disgusting. I mean, this was murder, and Kissinger was the one who spearheaded that invasion into Cambodia. Why don't we talk as much about the plight of the Native American? Because it brings out a lot of really ugly things without, that the pioneers of this country did. And I can go down all the things the CIA did in other countries for hours and talk about all of that. That's in Latin America and Middle East, what we've done to prop up dictators. I already talked about that in a previous video about, what Trump is doing is controversial, but it's not that unusual. So it's a very difficult issue because you bring these up and you say these, and people will. And I saw it even. Glenn Greenwald mentioned this from The Intercept, and he took a lot of shit for it. Now, actually, that conversation ended very civilly, which is why I'm not mentioning the person who brought it out, but who reacted in a very visceral way by saying you hate this country and all this, because he backtracked. He said sorry, and that's cool. So I didn't bring up the name, but the bottom line, he still had that visceral reaction, and then he thought about it. And he said, let's not lose our heads here. I mean, through Republican and Democratic administrations, before Trump, all of them have committed some pretty terrible acts, and it's uncomfortable to talk about it. Because when I think about Obama, I like a lot of the things he did, but he also did something, and he broke a lot of the mold. When you talk about Syria, he was trying to fight against it, to his credit. He was doing the best he could, but there's just a very pervasive culture in Washington, D.C. It's often brought to light by these think tanks, all these people, that there has to be a way it works, and this is how it is, and if people die on the other end of it, that's fine. And we see this right now even in Yemen, where not greatly reported, but has, and to the credit of some elected officials, such as Senator Chris Murray from Connecticut and Bernie Sanders, a number of people like that, they brought it to light, and even some Republicans like Rand Paul, and I believe Mike Lee also is in there. They've discussed this issue and they've talked about it. But now in the last week or so, that's the Saudi-led coalition, which has been backed, Saudi and the UAE, backed by the U.S., is about to, and has started now to attack a key port in Yemen to bring in humanitarian aid. And this is highly necessary because you have a cholera epidemic, you have bombs going off everywhere, you got a massive humanitarian crisis. And they attacked. And even to the point that the State Department and the Trump administration was kind of trying to tell them, don't do it. But they still did it, and when they did it, the U.S. had their back. The UK selling a lot of arms too. And it brings to light a big point. We like to talk about human rights, and I believe our ideals are pure. Not pure, but they're well-meaning. I mean, when you look at the Constitution, while far from perfect, with things like the 3/5, with things like the 3/5 compromise and all that sort of thing, I think the ideals are noble, and I think the document is forward-thinking and is something to model ourselves after and meet ourselves to a standard. But we're not there, and we've made progress in a lot of areas, but we're far from there. And to get to that point that we want to get to achieve those ideals, we have to be willing to criticize ourselves. We have to be willing to say hard truths so we don't repeat those mistakes and we can learn from those mistakes. And that's not being anti-American. That's not being anti-patriotic. Just like when you see the NFL players kneeling, that's not being against patriotism. That's talking about a societal ill they see, that is police brutality and systematic racism. So these are things we have to talk about. These are things we have to look at. But it seems like if you even say a little bit of that, you get a very visceral reaction. And that's because of something that I see as a cancer, and that's nationalism. And we see a lot of nationalism rising. And it's under this faux populism. Now, to me, populism is not a bad word, because I see populism is going for the worker, and it could be leftward populism that's looking to unite the workers of the different races, just trying to find a way to help, to help the people who need help. We're only as good as our weakest citizen. So we need to help those people. But we've been infiltrated with this rightward populism, nastiness that dehumanizes immigrants to the point where we're ripping kids away from their parents. This is not moral. This is not moving forward. This is moving backwards. So we have, if you don't take anything away from this other than one thing, to make that one thing the fact that it's okay to criticize your country. It's okay to criticize your family. It's okay to criticize your friends. It's okay because that's how you become better. All right? And it hurts to hear those criticisms. It doesn't feel good. When I'm reading a lot of things about what's been done in our history, I'm literally shaking and almost brought to tears. In the same way that if someone tells me I have flaws, it hurts and it cuts me deep. But on the flip side, when you need to hear those things to improve. And that's what we need to do as a nation. We need to hear those things to improve. So don't get nationalistic. It's good to have a patriotism. It's good to love your country. If you want to stand for the anthem, you stand for the anthem. That's your prerogative to do or to not do. That's your freedom to express yourself, and that's one of the things that makes American Ideal so beautiful, so great. But we have to be honest of our history, and we have to be honest of what we're doing now, and we have to be willing to fight to keep that and keep improving, to keep evolving. That's what we have to do. Otherwise, we're going to end up back in the same place. Things will get bad again. You'll have racial strife. You'll have economic strife. And you'll have, basically, if we don't learn from the environment aspect, we may end up global warming ourselves to death anyways. So, bottom line, listen to people, have an open mind. Don't be afraid to take some criticism or to dish out some. But at the end of the day, be honest about what we are and what we want to be, and let's move forward and learn from our past mistakes and try to really reach a more perfect union. Have a good night.